Okay, I think we can get started. Hi everyone, welcome to the final program in this series, expanding on 4 new online projects we commissioned on the occasion of Print Matter and Exile Books' publisher section at NADA Miami this past December. I'm Sunny, I'm the Affairs and Editions coordinator at Print Matter, and I'm really happy you guys are all here. I'm pleased to welcome this evening Federico, Tiger, and Agnes, who will share about their online project, Transparencia Index, which is a project consisting of a custom-based software that automatically scrapes data from the Plataforma Nacional de Transparencia, a system through which people can request public information from the Mexican government. The software identifies existing requests associated with topics of common interest that were previously denied on the basis of containing information classified by authorities. And I think what this project is exploring and kind of picking apart is this ever-increasing flow of unanswered civic concerns, and it is structured on this interactive website that our 3 guests will speak much more eloquently. And yeah, big thanks to the John S. and James L. Knight Foundation for funding this project in part, and for funding the other projects that comprise the kind of dynamic online presence of this Print Matter and Exile Books at NADA Miami, as well as this month's program series. You can visit artistbooksmiami.org to engage directly with these programs and learn more about the whole production that we did in Miami. We also organized a table, an online table, basically a collection of publications that we think are kind of in conversation with this program, that are thinking about surveillance and kind of computer technologies, the translation of digital to print, kind of like covert interactions with state, extra state, and statecraft. So the link to that should be in the chat. And then a few notes before we begin. Feel free to say hi in the chat and tell us where you're joining us from. And if you have any questions, you can drop them in the Q&A section of the Zoom at the bottom, or also just in the comments. And towards the end of the program, we'll have some time to answer questions, open things up for discussion, and kind of maybe play around a little bit with the material. And if you'd like to watch this with closed captions, the best way to do so is to click the link in the chat that leads you to our YouTube channel, which has auto-generated captions, and it's being live streamed there. And I guess if you have any other questions too, feel free to chat me or chat anyone here. I'm going to pass the mic to you.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for being here with us. I'm gonna share my screen to get started. Please let me know if it works. Can you all see the presentation?
And you have to do it again. It shared and then it went away. I might have to click it one more time.
What about that? Do you see it?
No.
No. Let me try it.
And we saw it for 1 second. We saw it for a second. It flashed. Yeah, now we can see it.
Now you can see it? Mm-hmm. All right. Yeah, thank you, Sonny, for the introductions, and thank you to Sonel, to Kit, to Max, to all of the Printed Matter staff, team, and also to the Exile Books team for making this event possible, for commissioning the work, and for all of the work that was involved in organizing the program. And thank you everyone who joined us tonight. Thank you for being here with us. We will be discussing to some degree of detail a platform through which citizens from Mexico can request public information to the government, information that is produced by governments and also other public or administrations that receive public funding, basically. But before we get started, I wanted to acknowledge the Well, I'm not a lawyer or a journalist, not even a transparency scholar. However, I've been involved in a capacity as an artist, with a practice that is pretty much based or grounded in research, in projects that where we have used the Transparencia, the platform, to access information. The project we're going to be presenting today came together as another impulse to explore the ways in which governance is expressed computationally through technological means, and also the affordances of automation to exercise or to operationalize digital rights. And more specifically, within the context of an event with printed matter, with this project, we were wondering what does it means to publish something? What does it mean to make information public? So those questions were always present as we were exploring the project with printed matter. And just one more comment about the program today. Agnes, Tiger, and myself will be presenting hopefully under an hour, and we're expecting after our presentation to have some time to discuss some of these issues with you, and we would definitely greatly appreciate your feedback. So we'll have a time for that, especially for trying to aim towards ideas regarding possible tactical implementations, reinterpretations, expansions to the tool we made. So I wanted to start the conversation tonight by telling you the story of a documented lie. In November of 2020, we published with investigative journalism agency Quinto Elemento Lab a story on the implementation of a facial recognition system in Coahuila. It was a system that was installed by the government of Coahuila, and it's a surveillance system that has facial recognition capacities. And it was the first case of the implementation of a technology like this at this scale in Mexico. The story we reported, well, it included or revealed a series of technical, legal, political, social issues about the system. It's a story that I worked on it together with journalist Paloma Robles. And it's a pretty detailed story, but one of the most important elements of the investigation, was understanding the databases that the police uses to do real-time facial analysis. And during the investigation, during the reporting, we did gain access to some of the images. They were actually shown to us by the police as they demo the technology. And within all of those images, there were those of two US citizens, Mena Yusif and Jose Felan, which is a couple that was being searched by the US Marshals for participating in acts of vandalism during the anti-racist protests in Minnesota after the murder of George Floyd, but that were mistakenly being labeled, searched as being terrorists in Mexico by the Coahuila police. And I shared their photos here because it's already a public story. Actually, the New York Times reporter Kashmir Hill followed up on our investigation in Coahuila, and specifically on the Yusif and Felan case, revealing a pretty large network and infrastructure of surveillance that crosses over the US-Mexico border, and also a horrifying case of family separation within the Mexican side. And in Mexico, one of the few resources we have to search for information is the Plataforma Nacional de Transparencia, which is a web platform that through which people can request governments information that they produce. The PNT, Plataforma Nacional de Transparencia, it's run by the INAI, which is the Instituto Nacional de Acceso a la Información. which is an independent body formed to ensure the following of the law of transparency and access to public information, which is a similar legal resource as the FOIA, Freedom of Information Act in the US. So a couple months after our piece with Quinto Elemento was published, I made a request seeking to document the fact that the police had the images of Mena and Jose, of the couple, which again, the police themselves had showed us. And I wanted that fact to be documented as an official response to a response to an information request. So I asked if the Ministry of Public Security had received images of any other biometric information from any security office in the United States. And I was told that they hadn't, which means that either they lied before when they told us that the FBI directly requested the Secretary of Security to search for the couple in Coahuila, or they lied in the response to our request, which would be, I don't know, which would be interesting because it would have been way more easy to get away with the typical excuse of denying information based on national security reasons. In any case, this answer is a documented lie. A few weeks after, an official from the Superior Court of Justice of Mexico City came to my house with two security officers to hand me a 100 pages lawsuit in which I appear as a third party involved. The case consists of a lawsuit made by the Coahuila Prosecutor Office to the ICAI, which is the Coahuila Institute for Access to Information, for having turned in my favor a complaint I made about a request that the prosecutor's office denied to me. The request is in relation to the investigation files of people in whose arrests, according to the state governor, the surveillance system had participated. And in Mexico, if a request, well, there's a mechanism where people can request for the ICAI, which again is an independent body to review the cases and determine whether certain information has to be made public. And in this case, the prosecutor's office is basically seeking a constitutional controversy, arguing that the ICAI made a mistake in determining the case in my favor, which would be an important precedent and one more resource that authorities would have to avoid complying with their transparency obligations. It's important to highlight that while I volunteered my name when I presented the complaint, the investigation carried out by the lawyers of the prosecutor's office cross-referenced data from multiple requests. They received and linked my personal identity to pseudonyms I have used in the past for making other requests. It's worth mentioning as well that I use these aliases for security reasons, and requesting information anonymously is, of course, a granted right. So coming from a state in the country where the police and the prosecutor's office have practices that undeniably violate human rights, if not criminal practices, it's difficult not to take such a level of detail in their investigation and a visit to my home as a form of intimidation. So discussing the issue of transparency in Mexico has more than one layer. On the one hand, it is a human right to which we rarely have access, given a culture of intense opacity on the part of governments. Which is why it continues to be important to forcefully insist that the INAI, which is responsible to ensuring transparency in the country, make sure that governments comply with their obligations, as well as to make the INAI accountable for the responsibility to ensuring a culture of transparency in the country. But it's also true that the INAI is constantly being attacked by the federal government, and its mere existence as one of the few resources there are to access information is a real risk. In recent months, we've seen different strategies coming mainly from the presidency to weaken this independent body and strengthen a culture of opacity. It's common to see these types of documents flowing around in social media as a symbol illustrating the state's secrets and the enormous obstacles that journalists, human rights defenders, and activists face daily as they seek factual information. Completely unusable documents are a commonplace in our country. And on the screen, we see the file that the DEA produced on General Cienfuegos, who was accused of links to drug trafficking in the US. And this file was declassified some time after it was originally released with pages after pages of fully redacted text. And just in regards to the topic of surveillance, R3D, an organization that defends digital rights in Mexico, developed a detailed report where they concluded that no authority empowered to spy has fully complied with their obligations in terms of transparency in the country. Furthermore, they found that 14 authorities, including the federal police, completely failed to comply with their transparency obligations, and only 21, including the PGR and the CISEN, which are the General Prosecutor's Office and a former version of the Federal Intelligence Agency, only partially comply. So as some of you might know, if you have used this platform, despite its importance as a tool to access information, the Plataforma Nacional de Transparencia is far from a perfect tool and has many technical problems. A fairly common use that has not been properly implemented, let's say, is the possibility to request the same information or ask the same question to several government offices at once. And it is a much needed feature that was added just a few years ago, but has not been fully implemented, or it produces very erratic results, to say the least. Take, for instance, the need to do a general survey to multiple entities at the same time. The platform has a maximum limit of 33 institutions. And I suppose this is anticipating a possible crossing of questions through the number of states there are in the country. But what happens, for example, if you want to seek information, if you want to seek information, obtaining the same type of data at a municipal level, or if you want to ask many institutions the same questions at once. And actually, this 33 number is also not fully working. The system gets stuck and it produces errors after, like if you add around 10 offices, it's very likely that they won't go through. So this is where automation could be used to simplify and increase the potential of the platform. And with this in mind, I started a conversation with Agnes to collaborate on a tool to streamline the process of requesting information. And I wasn't fully sure at the moment what would be technically possible and also actually useful, but there were several precedents where computing is used to procure access to information. This is on the screen an example of a bot that helps users to autofill requests with legal boilerplate, but it's used also to keep track of answers and to produce automatic complaints and additional requests. It's pretty interesting. And this is another example, which is probably less practical, but definitely more morbid. The US law, as you may know, requires certain governments to, or certain agencies from the government to produce records of individuals upon FOIA requests, with the exception that these individuals have to be dead. and this is for privacy reasons. So this bot generates a new FOIA request every time that the New York Times publishes an obituary, and on the screen we see a few faces produced from the automatic request the bot does. But we also thought of the possibility of automating requests as a form of political insistence. I had seen before on Twitter cases where people were denied information and asked other people to replicate their same questions to turn the matter into a matter of public interest and use that as another resource to access information or to request the information again. And this is something similar to what we know as Twitter reigns, but within the space of the Transparency platform. And on the screen, we see listings or people listing folios of the repeated requests that they perform. And yeah, I mean, it also occurred to us to use the tool as a way to gather negative evidence. We thought of cases in which it could be useful to document responses, even if they were negative, as evidence of the covering of a given investigative process. One common resource that governments use in order to deny information is to point to other entities as those that may be obligated to reply to that information. And these possible documents with negative answers could have been referred to preemptively for specific cases. But we also consider the possibility of scheduling automatic requests over periods of time. For example, in the case of Coahuila, the Ministry of Economics classified all of the information related to the purchase of the system for 2 years from the date that we requested the information, and that's on June 24 this year. So I have marked my calendar to request the information again, and obviously that's, you know, like this request is something that could be certainly automated. So we started researching the tool at a technical level, and Agnes will speak to that in a few minutes. But in order to understand the limits of the platform, we also had to become familiar not only with the platform's components, again, as a technical level, but also with the workflows behind the system. So I wanted to understand the obligation that the government has to answer questions, and for this I start making very open-ended requests on the theme of transparency, but in this case not of transparency at a legal level, but at an optical and aesthetic one. And here is one of the answers, and it says in Spanish, according to the Royal Spanish Academy, transparency is the quality of what is transparent, which is a pretty accurate response, I would say. Following this principle of understanding what the government offices considers to be an appropriate and worthy question, I generated empty requests with images of flowers attached and other things. And I wanted to cultivate a non-expected exchange with the people that are in charge of reviewing requests. And on the screen, we see a response that says, the only thing that appears in the attached image is the image of in the attachment, I'm sorry, it's the image of a rose. And it wasn't a rose, it was a camellia, but it was, again, a pretty fair response to our request. And I wanted to destabilize the system with poetic devices. So I sent several poems that deals with themes related to invisibility, visibility, transparency, and I crafted actual requests in the form of verses seeking information on the role of the state in terms of concealment processes and its monopoly of information. And what you see on the screen are not the requests, but the responses with poems or poetic requests framed within the bureaucratic language. Of course, as we would expect, the state does not like poetry, the answers I received discredited the language in verses as a valid form for asking requests, even for those that were actual questions. However, not all of the attempts were in vain. To my surprise, some offices did engage with their responsibility to answer some of the most difficult questions ever asked. What is art? That's what we asked. And the Secretary of Culture of the state of Coahuila defined art in epistemic terms, quoting Leo Tolstoy, Arthur Danto, and Walter Pater. And the state of the officials in Baja California answered the same impossible question through a small survey that they conducted with local artists. We also got responses with abstract interpretations of the image of a black square that I attached through information requests. And to quote one of these responses, it says, "The absence of light and absorption of all colors in physics, in the arts, the presence of all of them, everything and nothing in a box," they commented. So it's worth mentioning that all of the official responses and requests are recorded and made accessible in the database of the platform. I like thinking of these exchanges within the platform as a form of publishing, claiming the need to rethink what it means to make something public and what are the structures that control what it's deemed to be publishable. On the screen, we see the fragment of a response where the officials refuse to elaborate on a formal response, given it would be quote unquote absurd to do so for the request being quote unquote a political poem. And during this stage, we were pretty aware of the work that was involved in the other side of our requests. So we continuously wonder about the ethical implications of interacting with the resource, with tool in such a way. And of course, we set limits to ourselves to make sure we wouldn't overwhelm any communications channels, and we were pretty sensitive with the number and frequency in which we submitted requests. But it was also important to recognize, to acknowledge this process as the study of an incredibly opaque infrastructure, and continue to develop the project under the, like motivation of contributing with something that could become at some point a tool in favor of access to information. And as we were asking ourselves these questions, I kept in mind the words that I heard from Uruguayan artist Luis Kamitzer in relation to the role of the artist as a disorganizer of the world, and where I would add that such acts of disorganization are crucial to understanding how was indeed the world organized. And we will now continue. We'll hear from Agnes on the more technical side of things, and on the forensic wrestling she undertook with the information request platform. So I'm gonna stop sharing my screen.
Hi, 1 sec. I'm gonna start sharing my screen. Is my screen visible?
Yep.
It is visible.
Oh. Cool. So good?
Yep.
Cool. So yeah, I guess actually like about this time last year, Federico got in touch with me. So I'm a software engineer, I guess mostly. I work quite a bit with artists, and I do some other work as well that's much more to do with like open data, and I guess like specifically like public data projects that like parasite on like existing forms of infrastructure. And so this has been a really interesting project for me in a lot of ways. But yeah, Federica got in touch with me this time last year and was like, hey, like, I really want, like, I heard you make bots. Like, I really want to make a bot that can like submit requests to this platform. And so Muckrock, which Federico shared an example it also produces the FOIA machine. The project that I really, really like. There's also like a tool in the UK called What Do They Know, and a bunch of other like I think really, really interesting like government infrastructure adjacent like transparency platforms that are specifically around like opening up access to like bureaucratic pieces of machinery. And so these were like projects that I was definitely looking at the kind of beginning of like thinking about this project. But yeah, like I guess classically, like you get a question like that, and you're like, oh God, I wonder, like, okay, like I guess the first thing I will do is like you know, like download some HTML documents and like have a poke around and like think about this. And so this is I'm just showing this because it's kind of a beautiful artifact. I guess I feel a bit out of place in like I guess a kind of graphic design context, but I thought this is kind of like an interesting image. This is just like me downloading HTML files from the website and loading them as a local file on my computer, but it reformats the document weirdly. But the process of automating requests to the platform mostly involves like the use of a browser automation tool called Selenium. And what that does is essentially allows you to produce like a browser, like it emulates a browser that can like I guess mimic the movements of a person like clicking around a web page, but using what's called a headless browser, an automated browser. So this is just a screenshot of like web I guess like web source code. And so the process, I'm actually just going to show, I guess like where did I put this page? So I've got this is a page on Platforma de Transparencia. Federico also just showed this page, but if I did like press like the Command Option I, if anyone's curious, or like you can also like right click inspect, but it will show you the like underlying elements in the page. So a lot of the work initially on this project that I was doing was like kind of like it's kind of fiddly, it's kind of interesting because what you're doing is you're essentially like figuring out like how a site is put together and like what would it take to have like a kind of automatic interaction with this site. And of course the kind of easiest way to do this is to discover like whether or not you can simply find an endpoint. So find like when you submit this form on the site, like can you just make like an HTTP request to the server and submit a request? And so after a little bit of experimentation, it turned out like not quite. But what you could do is write a script that automatically logs you into the browser. It's also really important to note at this point that you can no longer do this. The site has actually changed since we did this part of the project, which for reasons that I think Federico has already touched on and that I will expand on in a minute, is probably like quite a good thing. But anyway, so for various reasons, you can't do this anymore, but it would be that you could automatically log into the site and then submit an HTTP request as if it came from your logged in account. But what that does is it circumvents all of this part of the site and, you know, theoretically would allow you to submit like many more requests and request much more flexibly. So anyway, this was a kind of process of like poking around, and then I think fairly early on, I sent Federico an email being like, yeah, this can be done. And then we had oh, sorry, I'm not trying to share this. I'm trying to share the slideshow. Yeah, this can be done. And then fairly early on, we were like, okay, like this actually seems like on many levels, like potentially like quite unethical, not least because the INAI site, so this is just showing me like running a script that like opens up a browser and then like eventually kind of like logs in. So this is it's hard because it looks exactly like a normal browser, but you can see this message saying Chrome is being controlled by automated test software. So anyway, I like have this script that like logs in with this, and I sent it to Federico, and then we're immediately like, hey, like this seems like a bit like suspect, or like is this a good idea? And so yeah, this is the kind of like back end structure of the requests we were making, and which is just the kind of entries on the form. And anyway, yeah, I think fairly quickly we're like, okay, like actually, like is that a good idea? Like what this could do is like very quickly, you know. And so what we did was we tested like a couple of times sending blank requests to individual institutions. What we never tested was like, can you actually send a request to like 50 institutions at once? And the kind of first meeting we had was a discussion of like, well, in order to test, have to do that, and like it seems unethical even to do that, because what you're doing by doing that is like clogging up a system, and it's the kind of, it is the system of like accountability. It seems wrong to take an adversarial attitude towards this entity. And so we kind of went back and forth for a while. So this was like during, I guess, the kind of like arming and ahhing phase of like, could we like produce like something that lives alongside and essentially like parasites of this platform that allows for the kinds of uses that Federico has been describing, for example, like the use of the insertion of like legal boilerplate into a request, which is not against the nature of the platform, but does make it easier for like various people to navigate the bureaucracy. Could we have a server that imposes limits? So this is one of these diagrams that we made, like thinking about this. I'll just go back to this slide. This was actually in, so in creating, the platform has like a really, or had certainly a very unique way of like constructing the way it makes a request to like multiple institutions simultaneously. And in order to do that, basically it creates like a string out of an amalgamation of the name of the institution, a prefix that's, I guess, kind of, it's not like a unique identifier, but it's like an identifier for that institution in the database, the state prefix, and then also the name of the state. And so it kind of composes this like really long string of like all of the states that it sends a request to. And so in order to like get that to work, we also like made a index of like all of the public institutions that you can send a freedom of information request to in Mexico, which was also nice because that wasn't something we'd initially been able to find. So we also like have this index now. And one thought that we had was also having this in a Google Sheet, having this to be something that people can actually like use as a way to like track the way that their like requests are responded to by public bodies as well. And so that's something we also kind of considered during use of the platform. Is there a like way to link these together as a way to allow people to record transparently the interactions they've had with various public bodies, because it's not obvious from the site how transparent or not a body has been when you interact with them. So anyway, these were kind of this process of thinking about automating requests. And at some point, we had all these questions, and quite open-ended, and the project, because of COVID and a bunch of other things, got pushed back for a while. And then we came back to it, and the site had changed, and a couple of things had happened. One was that Cloudflare protection, and this actually changed again since, but Cloudflare protection had been like introduced so that it was much harder to like access the site via an automated browser. And the other thing that happened was that the login had a captcha put on it, so you could no longer log into an automated process. You had to sign in, clicking the "I'm not a robot" thing, which famously is really actually very adept at recognizing robots. And so we were like, okay, like it seems like in a sense this has kind of been decided for us. Like this is something that's probably gonna be like, you know, in some ways negative. And it's still like, I think something that feels like difficult. It's like this platform is like makes certain forms of transparency, makes certain forms of request kind of like really difficult, but at the same time, to have this kind of adversarial relationship like feels like pretty shady. So we became really interested in another part of this platform, and this is a really great thing. And you know, this is also like a database which is open of all of the transparency requests that have been submitted through the INAI, going back to like 2002, I think. So like really old, and like thousands and thousands and thousands of requests. Everything that is requested gets published on this database. It's hosted on the same platform, and it's searchable. And it's also interestingly got a bunch of different like classifications of reasons why requests were or were not responded to. And so we became really interested in like this metadata. In fact, we'd actually looked at this a few months before, because what we'd been particularly interested in when we were thinking about like, well, what could a bot do? What is the like utility of automation here? Like, what I think Federico's example of like making a request on the same day every year kind of relates to another thought that we had, which was, can we find like requests, which it turns out you can select for requests that have been denied because they request classified information. Can we filter for those requests and then find requests that were made at a time where if the classified information was classified not because it pertained to, I think there's a few exceptions to this, like if it pertains to an individual, it remains classified, but lots of kinds of classified information will become unclassified after a particular point. So we're like, what if we could have a system which finds these classified requests and then throws them back up? That turned out, in the terms of automation, that turned out to be a bit of a dead end. And it turned out to be a bit of a dead end because like a lot of the requests were like quite random. And yeah, like contained a lot of things like, who is this guy kind of requests, which like are always going to get returned like, hey, you can't ask that. And so we kind of we thought about for a bit like having some kind of human curation process where we actually like go through and like manually find those requests that want to be resubmitted and tag them. But then when we kind of, after this kind of process, we came back to this and thought a lot more about like what actually is like, I think especially because it's really important to note as well that I can't speak Spanish, and so throughout this whole process it was also like, and I'm also like not very familiar with the like political situation in Mexico or like the context of a lot of these requests. And so a lot of this process was also like me sending a corpus of documents to Federico being like, hey, like, what do you think of these? Like, do you think these are interesting? Do you think that we should use these? Do you think that there's something going on here? And so we had these like back and forth conversations about this. And initially it was like, there's kind of like, there's a lot of like, there's some interesting things in here. There's stuff that I didn't know about in here, or like this seems like interesting, but there's a lot of noise basically. And so we kind of came back to this like process that Federica had been going through of like skimming through all of these documents to like find things and like try and surface like useful information. And so what we ended up doing was making a tool that we came up with or Federica came up with a bunch of keywords that like related to topics that, so the one constraint with this database is you can't just get all of the records associated with a given thing. And also you can't download them. So it's not, it doesn't make it easy for you to, for example, say, I want to get all the records where like these 5 criteria are satisfied. Instead, what you need to do is do a full text search. So you pick a keyword and say, I'm going to do a search of this word. And then you select from this kind of sidebar, like, you tick all these different fields. And so we got our good friend, the Selenium browser out. Is this going to play? You should play. So this is just this is actually, you can just see it running in my terminal, but thinking about it, so this is basically like my like computer conducting like a headless search for various keywords and like downloading them to my computer and indexing them. And so what we did was that we said, okay, like we're going to get a list of like a bunch of keywords that we think are going to like throw up interesting information. And what we're going to do is we're going to find all of the requests which have, the text of all of the requests which have been denied because they contain this classified information. We're just going to create a really, really big index of these, like, in relation to these topics that Federico has been kind of investigating, or like I know Federico like worked with a bunch of different like journalist groups and contexts that he has to also like expand this list of words. And so we ended up with this kind of like big JSON database, and there were some nice bits. There was a bit where like, again, like skimming through it, like Federico like found like a request that he'd made. This is like hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of requests. I think it's actually like, I think it's like 10,000 or something. I should have counted this before this talk. Anyway, so there was kind of, like fun bits where like we were like, this is like it's like an old friend, like finding these like artifacts from like past requests. And so this is the kind of object that you get it. It's like a JSON object. And so what we did in the summer, we turned this into kind of quite a basic app that basically took all of these keywords and it highlighted them and as a hyperlink, so you could like click through and find requests that like contained one of these keywords. So it's this kind of like fairly like bare bones reading app, and that had this kind of effect. It was on display on touch screens, whereas if you like click onto things, you get this you get a kind of blot over it, so it becomes kind of harder to read. And so anyway, this is and then a couple of months later, Federico got back in touch and was like, oh, we want to do this project again, and also have been in touch with Tiger, who's a designer. And so the three of us kind of started collaborating on like a second version of the site, which would provide like a much more kind of like comprehensive, I guess, comprehensive or like just detailed like exploration of like what was going on. And so Tiger's gonna talk through the site and talk a lot about the kind of different like graphical and structural aspects of it. I guess one thing, and I guess maybe this will make more sense in the context of like Tiger like going through this as well. But I guess I can talk a little bit about the process that we went through to expand this kind of index of keywords. So initially, this index of keywords, so this came out of like a conversation that the three of us had about like, well, what does it mean to like navigate this index? And like initially we have this like list of words that's like a list that Federico and contacts of Federico have like come up with. It's like the salient words in this index and the ones that we search for. But it's also clear from all of the requests that we downloaded that there is a number of like themes that link these that maybe aren't necessarily keywords that we search for particularly, but still like provide a way to like navigate between these themes. And so what we did was I looked into a kind of natural language processing technique called topic modeling, which is it's like a way of like statistically analyzing text, specifically to like find the topic of what like a piece of text is about. And so this is, and I'm not really a machine learning engineer. I find it kind of interesting. I guess also like, well, topic modeling is machine learning, but it's a way of specifically a kind of like semantic analysis of text, which is kind of supposed to throw out like the kind of themes that like a piece of text is concerned with. And so what we did was we started to kind of experiment with like, can this like find a number of more keywords? Like, in fact, could we completely automate the process of finding keywords? And like every time we ask in this process, like, can we completely automate? The answer is like, definitely not. Terrible idea. But what it did do was provide a kind of, I guess, like a random seed and also a kind of thread of like computerized skimming that again, like threw up a bunch of like quite interesting results. So I actually used a bunch of code written by a guy called Armand Olivares. So the way topic modeling works is that you have like a big data set of like labeled, in this case, like labeled Spanish news articles. And it was also, I think, mostly like a Spain-based like news outlet. So, you know, it's not in so many ways, it's like not a perfect data set to like engage with like the corpus of like text that is being downloaded from this platform. So it's like Spanish news articles, I think from a number of different like Spain-based sources. And what it does is it takes this data set, and so that these have been like labeled by like groups of people, and the people involved like label each news article with like the salient like keywords that they believe relate to the topic. And so what you do is you take in this model and you give it a kind of statistic that sees a kind of statistical basis for like, oh, like this is what a computer thinks this statistically looks like an important word in this context. And so anyway, so I've used this kind of topic modeling model. This is the data set. So Spacey is like used a lot in like language analysis. It's a Python library, and I use the data set ES Core News MD, which is this Spanish news markup database data set, and a process called hierarchical Dirichlet process. Anyway, the output is this like huge list of words, and we used a bunch of like different models and different techniques, kind of not even in like an, oh, this one's better than that one way, but in a kind of like, let's produce just a bunch of lists of words. And then, you know, what happened was like, I made all of these lists of words, and then Federico kind of scanned through them and was like, oh, this is an interesting keyword, this is an interesting keyword. And so like, based on that process is kind of like, I guess like computer skimming, seeding, iteration, Federico reading process, we arrived at this like expanded list of keywords that link all of these different kind of articles together. And so yeah, I guess that is what I'm going to talk about. And then Kaiga, if you want to take over.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry, I'll stop sharing my screen.
Yeah, I will share the website. Yeah, so I'm just going to be talking about a couple of the, both the design decisions and also the sort of more conceptual thinking that was happening behind those decisions. So earlier, Agnes had shown a screenshot of an earlier iteration of the site with the sort of like the black blobs appearing where you would click. And that was my first sort of like visual introduction to what Agnes and Federico had been doing. And through our earlier conversations, we had pretty quickly sort of pivoted, I think, from this central metaphor of opacity to one that's more about like accumulation of data, and also this idea of like the user having to traverse somehow through this huge amount of data. So in terms of the structure of the site, I wanted to really make sure that we were preserving the sort of like research history that each user was taking as they were like traversing through all of this information. I'm just going to sort of run it in the background, but so since they're both these sort of like random and also user dictated mechanisms for deciding what information shows up, using the website really becomes like a negotiation between the agency of the user and also the agency of the website itself, which also involves, you know, like having to wrestle a little bit with the site, which I just had to do because there will be moments when you'll reach sort of like dead ends in the data points, or you'll have to like refresh the site a couple of times before it gives you like a more fruitful topic to start with, or a more fruitful like random seed that it starts with. And so like as you progress through the site, it sort of expands across like two axes. So each of these columns represents one of the topics that Agnes had just talked about. And like as these are expanding like through this axis, all of these links to the other topics also expands the website through the y-axis. And so like eventually as you're traversing through the site, like more and more information starts to build up, and you like really start to see like your like own personal provenance of how you had interacted with the website. And this like really, you know, like has parallels to the shape that research on the internet in general takes. So, you know, like this idea of like traversing from hyperlink to hyperlink and going down rabbit holes, and then retracing your steps and going down other pathways. So it's an incredibly like non-linear experience. And so the website itself is an exercise in non-linear reading that then gets like recorded across these two dimensions, basically. So another thing that we were really thinking about was this idea of skimming as a main form of reading, and that had really come from, or I'm in my own personal work as well, I'm really inspired by the poet Tan Lin, who works with this concept of ambient literature. And he sort of describes his work as like working against avant-garde notions of difficulty and privileging modes of readings like skimming or quickly and things like that, rather than close reading. And so with this website, what we really wanted to do was like encourage both kinds of reading and also like a vacillating between the two. And again, like that also reflects the end result of like the user like really dictating their own individual path through this dense network of information. And also in terms of like this idea of ambient literature, interacting with the site really means like engaging with a body of text that is like always changing and that like the user doesn't necessarily always have agency over. So like, you know, like because of its like inherently like web-based nature, like the text and the performance of the text happens independently of you. And so like we designed it so that the website itself will move and display random links even without user interaction, and will like populate these different column topics with more information, even like without any interaction. So the tool like technically doesn't even need to be interacted with to work, quote unquote. And it, after a while, it just goes into sort of like wallpaper mode. And so like, for example, a new column for a new topic will appear after every 2 minutes of inactivity, and then a new text excerpt will appear every 30 seconds of inactivity, in like down below here. So really like the experience of negotiating with the website is really like, there's a certain path that the website itself will take that's just like based on a random seed. And then there's the path that you as a user might want to take, and like both things are happening at the same time and are like affecting each other. And so on that note, the other thing that like became really important or like salient is this idea of randomness, especially randomness as a tool for catalyzing pattern recognition. A lot of the fiddling or like designing of the website kind of came down to adjusting various parameters to make sure that the website like felt like it was the right balance between random and non-random decisions. Because randomness, we found like created a lot of really good opportunities for synchronicity and pattern recognition, and like presenting the reader with a lot of new and unexpected linkages that like might not otherwise happen if, for example, you know, like the site was more straightforward and only relied on user decisions. And it's interesting also to think about this idea of synchronicity from like a Jungian perspective, because Jung uses synchronicity to, quote, like describe circumstances that appear meaningfully related yet lack a causal connection. So like through making a lot of the site's decisions random, it sort of forces the users to like exercise their own sort of like interpretive or like hermeneutic muscle, and like forces all of these unexpected connections to happen. So yeah, like in general, randomness makes the work more open and beyond like just like the discrete textual linkages that's caused by like the key phrases showing up in multiple contexts across the database. And like, I suppose like actually makes the linkages between the database more robust just by the simple act of like being able to display together like various topics even without the database itself thinking that they are related. And then also one other aspect of the website was the programmatic sound. I had muted it just so it wasn't as distracting for this presentation, but the sound also became pretty important mostly just to contribute to like the feeling of the website, I think. And also for the user interaction with it to feel a lot more like haptic and responsive and alive. And the constant beat that plays while the text is being displayed also like in a way evoked both a heartbeat and like a sort of bureaucratic quality. So I thought that was really nice, like being able to present the machine both you know, like situated in metaphors of bureaucracy and of like biology in a way. Yeah, that's all I have to say about it. I think we can move on, Federico, to questions.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, thank you, Agnes. Thank you, Tiger. I don't know, Sonny, if there's anything else we should do before. I mean, we're really interested in hearing from the group, from the audience. We cannot see anyone, but I think that there's probably a way to just connect through the chat. I mean, we would be really interested in hearing feedback, in hearing questions, in having a conversation. I'm also going to post in the chat a Google Doc, which basically contains all of the words that the database currently has. And you'll see, I'll post it now, but basically you will see on the first column of the document, and please feel free to interact with it, but on the first column, there's basically all of the words that we queried, that we searched, and that we extracted content from. And those words came from conversations we had. Those were decisions we made, things that we decided to search. And then the other columns are things that, well, the second column is the column B is everything that was processed by the NLP model. So this is everything that it recognized as meaningful concepts or concepts that were shared among the requests. And there's a couple of other things that were manually added. So all of this is basically what triggered the database, and the database is a mirror, a result of these topics. So we're really interested in, like gathering other terms and increasing the database. Really what we show is it's a small, I mean, it's a huge database, but it's obviously a really small fraction of like what's out there in the platform. And again, this is, as you saw, I mean, a small effort to try and think through the possibilities of automation, the possibilities of programmatic analysis of some of the subjects that become apparent through the requests. And I mean, we like think about this as a very much incomplete memorial, if you will, of the civic concerns that are shared by the by people that have interacted with this platform before. So yeah, I don't know, Sonny, if there's anything else that you might want to add. We would be really interested in hearing some questions, and then also just interacting through the Google Doc for a little bit. It's already a little bit over an hour, so I don't know also how much time we were planning, Sonny.
Yeah, we can shift to some questions. There are a few here and there, and I encourage everyone else who's been watching to take some time to ask any questions or think of any questions you may have. One question that came up kind of earlier on in the conversation was about the practice of forensic architecture. Someone named Zoe in the chat is asking if you've worked with them, and if you haven't, if you have thoughts on their approach to the kind of manipulation and presentation of data and their practice, and if you're familiar with it, if you're into it, if you have critiques of it. Yeah, I'm curious of your thoughts on that.
We do not work directly with them, or we haven't, but I just saw that Sergio Beltran Garcia, who does work with them, is in the chat. So maybe Sergio would have a more informed way of discussing their work. I mean, I see where the question is coming from, just in this, like our interest in the intersection between, like techniques, computation, activism, and the arts. So, oh no, this is, I'm just reading through some of the questions, but some of the chat. But anyways, yeah, I mean, there's a lot of respect for what they do, for sure, but we do not have a direct connection with forensic architecture.
Well, maybe to dovetail on that question from Sergio, he asks, how do you envision this project to be made actionable by journalists or other practitioners in Mexico? Maybe to share about that.
I mean, that's an important question. I think that the project started with that hope in mind, right? And what we wanted to do, it was, I mean, the project was responding to a very actual need of, like streamlining the process of making many requests or making the same question to a bunch of different entities through the platform, which is not something that the platform does well at the time. As we were trying to develop that, we realized the potential issues of developing a tool like that, because it could have been pretty easily misused, right? If we would develop something that, like at some point we had something that where we could have requested hundreds of requests to the same office at once, and that was obviously, like a dangerous path. So we didn't want to develop that technology. And so we're in that process, Sergio, and we're trying to figure out what can we do. And it's a process, it's a project that it's definitely ongoing, and this conversation hopefully will help build towards that. In my mind, the project is still, or right now, the what we're presenting with Printed Matter is, like a small fraction that it's more thought through the lens of art, in the sense that we're, like thinking a lot about the, like this website as something that, like provides a, like a sort of mirror or memorial to the public civic concerns of citizens in Mexico, and we're thinking about it in those terms. We definitely want to make it actionable, and I think that there's a lot of potential in terms of, like data, the analysis of the database through different tools. There's many things to be done and learned. I think that through engaging with the actual database that we created, but that's not something that we have done yet. There's like some, like intuitive conclusions and thoughts that came from engaging with that content. For example, like most very incredibly sadly, it was really hard to deal with certain subjects. Certain keywords produced many more results, and there were many more requests for things. For example, when we're like querying the word feminicidios, that was something that was almost like like an amount of queries that was almost impossible to deal with, which tells you something about the state of things in Mexico. There were also a lot of requests regarding COVID, because of like how secretive, how little amount of information there is in regards to decisions the government has made to administer the health crises and so on. So there's like a lot of potential, I think, in engaging with the information and dealing with the information as data and trying to process it through different tools, such as the ones that Agnes was just presenting. So we're hoping, we're working towards that, and hopefully, like this conversation can also, like help provoke possible paths that are more tactical.
Yeah, I feel like in some ways that actually also answers this question that one question that Celine had put in the chat, which is just about navigating something expressive and artistic, but also also understanding and being conscious of the political and tactical use, and how you see those goals aligning, or if they're in tension with one another, and how you navigate that. I guess maybe to hear from Agnes and Tiger, like what was the experience like to understand the political context and Celine's wondering how familiar you were with the language and this political context and engaging with the project.
I guess, yeah, I can speak to that first. Celine, like I don't speak Spanish, and I also wouldn't say I'm particularly familiar with the political context. So I would say that like kind of throughout this project, I felt like I would, in as much as is possible, like defer any kind of like decision which felt like a kind of active decision to Federico, which often, I think there's always a sense, and I think this is involved to lesser extent with other collaborations that I've had with artists, obviously in like a very different way, but like there's a kind of sense of like, oh, like what is a decision I should make and what is a decision someone else should make about how this thing should work. And so for us, that really consisted of like pretty much every time I did something, I would just email Federico with like, like I did this, I think this, or like, I wonder what you think about that. And like, can you read these things? A lot of just like sending like text dumps back and forth and like kind of talking about the implications of various things. But yeah, I feel like I definitely feel like I have like an extremely kind of external perspective, and I feel pretty like, kind of cautious about that. And, really wary of making decisions, but also still feeling like fairly responsible. And so, yeah, I think that's definitely like a tension for me, and not one that I feel is like at all resolved as well.
Yeah, I would definitely echo that. I also don't speak Spanish and wasn't totally familiar with the political context at first. In terms of how I felt in the process, I mean, when Federico approached me to help with the project, I think he framed it pretty well, that, like we were interested in creating this tool that was also a poetic intervention. And so like, because a lot of my past work also deals with like poetic interventions on the web, I don't know, it seemed kind of or like I felt like I understood sort of like the direction that he wanted to go. And then at that point, the database that Agnes had generated was, like in a state where I felt like, I had like a lot to work with. And so it sort of was more a matter of like working with the database and like trying to facilitate like some sort of experience for other people to be able to traverse that, more so than like me like making any of the more like artistic or like political decision making that happened like more in the beginning before I was brought on.
Thanks for sharing those answers. Another question someone has is, and maybe you can speak to this more broadly, the kind of stylistic decisions around building the website. And someone named Ling asks, just to, why would you use black and white instead of using any color? They say they personally love using black and white, making digital pieces, but maybe you can also just speak to what the kind of design perspective and how you were able to kind of navigate designing this.
Yeah, I remember us like going through a couple color schemes. Like at one point it was magenta in order to reflect the original like Transparencia website. And then at another point it like was this like manila yellow color, also to sort of like evoke like bureaucracy in this way. Yeah, I think ultimately we decided to strip it down a little bit more, just to make it, just to make sure that the design didn't feel too distracting, or like definitely, you know, like took a back seat. Most of the like actual design work, I think, like actually didn't have that much to do with aesthetics, and more had to do with like data organization, and visualization, and like design in that sense, rather than like the actual like typography or the colors or things like that, I would say.
Cool. Well, if anyone else has any questions, you can share now. Otherwise, you know, maybe we can end it on this question about the longevity of the project. I think you've touched upon this in so many different ways, like where the project stands right now, the kind of tensions and uncertainties and kind of future of it. But yeah, someone asks, do you intend on this platform operating for a long time? What's the feedback that you've gotten, which I think you may have touched upon too, but I guess, you know, to conclude, if there's anything else you want to share about that question.
Yeah, I mean, those are good questions. I think that it's always, I mean, it's good. They're good questions because they're not necessarily questions that we have asked ourselves. I think that there's sometimes with these types of projects where, you know, like they might regain traction or life after something might happen. And I think that it's important to try and figure out opportunities to socialize the work, and hopefully it would provoke, you know, like potential collaborations, other conversations with other people. Right now, again, for example, I mean, there's a document that we just shared through which we could collaborate on the collection of new words, and that would increase database. It's also hard to provoke, you know, like or to prompt, you know, like a collaboration framework like this. But the website itself right now is has you know, like the database is static to an extent, right? But there's the opportunity to keep growing on it. But also, I mean, that's a tricky question as well, and that's a good question because the technology we develop, it's always, I mean, it's meant, and it's interacting with a platform that it's pretty unstable and that keeps changing, you know? And that's one of the reasons why we, you know, like some of the things that we wanted to do were not possible technically, but there's still a lot of research and a lot of work to be done in order to make, for example, happen. I mean, something that I'm still pretty interested in doing, but that would require like a larger budget and a bigger group of people, and like definitely the input of people that are experts in Transparencia in the context of Mexico would be to, you know, like something that Agnes described, and that was a big part of our conversation, was the possibility to identify, you know, like classified or questions that were denied, or requests that were denied because the answer would contain classified information, but which classification of the information would have expired already. And there's like a lot of ways in which we could detect that and automate, like resubmit those questions once the information has expired. And it's, I mean, I have had a bunch of conversations with other people where, you know, like they're researching a topic, and then, you know, like they get to a dead end because they cannot unlock certain information because it gets classified, and then they, you know, like keep moving with their life and work and research, and they might not approach that topic anymore for whatever reason. So it would be interesting to be able to develop tools for to provoke these types of re-engagements with certain topics. So that's something that we're still interested in trying to build, but at the same time, you know, like, and again, I think that this is a pretty good way of also ending the conversation, and also a good crisis moment to our project, or like a moment to really think about what we want to do with all of this, because as Agnes said, they, you know, like only a few weeks after we finish our project, they put a CAPTCHA robot detection tool in the platform, and that's really, it's hard to unlock those. And also, I mean, we really like to acknowledge that as something that is definitely in favor of the platform, something that is like I mean, we were surprised at the beginning that what wasn't something that it already have. And so there's like all of these different things that have been added to the platform. I mean, we couldn't be sure whether it was truly in reaction to the way that we were interacting with it, but there were other tools that were added to the platform in order to prevent automatic browsers and different technologies to interact automatically with it, including a CAPTCHA, which at the end of the day is like a pretty successful end to our research, because at the end of the day, what we want is for that platform to become better. So this whole process, we also really think it as, like as a non-solicited user report, if you will, and hopefully there will be, like spaces and moments where we could also engage in conversation with the actual people developing the platform. And again, yeah, this is coming from a place also of respect of recognition of the need to having tools like that that are in one hand at risk, but also important to seek to make information more transparent.
Cool. Well, thank you so much, everyone, for being here, and to Federico, Agnes, and Tiger for taking the time and talking through this project. It was really inspiring and interesting. Yeah, thanks, everyone.
Thank you, everyone. And we'll leave the document open for a few weeks. Hopefully, some of you can add words there. And I mean, we're around. So please definitely get in touch if you want to keep this conversation going. And thank you, everyone, for joining us tonight. And thank you, Agnes. Thank you, Tiger.
Yeah, thank you so much, everyone.
Bye.
Yeah, thanks, guys.